Suzanne's Paparazzi Jewelry, 24/7 shopping available. 160920 is the code. Show her some love, like she showed us. K&A Custom Crafts on Facebook.
So hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Whatever on Wednesday. I'm very excited tonight because I have a very special guest, and it's Rocco. He's actually going to be the host of our newest program on Coast to Coast. We haven't pinpointed a name, but we have a topic. Chris is very intelligent, a savvy gambler, and an all-around sports enthusiast. So hi, Rocco. Welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
So tell the listeners a little bit about you. You're not strictly a handicapper. You certainly have a diverse background, and you certainly have a broad portfolio. So we'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, well, I've lived all over. I spent about 20 plus years living in Los Angeles, working in various forms in the entertainment industry. One of the best parts of living in Los Angeles is easy access to Las Vegas. So I spent a lot of time in Las Vegas when I was on the West Coast, and over the years, doing a lot of betting on sports, and I would never say I did it professionally for a living. But I would say I supplemented my income pretty well over the years. And I've been at it a long time. So I've learned a lot of lessons, the hard way. But the last, 10, 20 years, it's been pretty good. It's been pretty profitable as sort of like a little side hustle, and it's fun. It's an interesting hobby. And, it's a hobby that you can actually potentially profit from, whether it's a few $100 here or there or something bigger than that. So
we just want to throw a caveat out there. So we know that gambling, sports betting isn't legal in all states. So be mindful of your state laws and regulations. We're not advocating that anybody break the law. But
that's right. We're not even advocating that anybody gamble, or like, it's just a fun, different angle to talk about sports, and I think even if you're not a gambler, I think it'll be a fun show, and it'll be just providing some different angles on some of the teams that you might root for or whatever. Some people have office pools that are very low stakes, $10-$20, and you pick all the games each week. So, maybe they can get some help with that or whatever the case may be. But yeah, it's not like, we're saying that gambling is you're gonna get rich gambling or whatever. It's a fun hobby. It's a fun thing to talk about, and everyone can sort of deal with it in the way they want to.
Yeah, not only that, it doesn't even have to have any monetary value at all. It could just be for bragging rights around the office or what have you. If you're a savvy, you can pick the teams appropriately and the winners. It's always more exciting. And I want to talk about your bio a little bit. You left out the most important part. What about those family genes? all the viewers, they certainly they can tell by your rugged, handsome good looks that you're related to some pretty amazing people, and I have to say that I'm one of those people, so I want to put a shout out there for our bloodline.
Okay.
So we certainly have an intimate connection, and that's exciting to talk about too.
And so that means anything nice you've just said about me completely can be disregarded by everybody since we're blood relatives. You have to say that, or else you have to deal with me at the family barbecue next weekend.
So not true. And we may actually have a family barbecue this weekend. The word on the street is. So that's an exciting prospect.
Absolutely.
So I want to ask Chris a question. So I'm new. I'm in a different role here on the network. Am I gonna? Do we have any comments out there, Chris? I don't see any on my chat box.
No, we don't.
Okay, all right. So I'm in the right spot.
Yeah.
So great. So we're gonna wing it, and tell us a little bit. First of all, tell us something. Your greatest success stories gambling. I know you've had some pretty decent payouts and some exciting wins throughout the years. Do you have any great story? I know you have some great stories. So I think the listeners would certainly be inspired by those.
Yeah. I've got a few. And what's interesting too is like, my best gambling stories and memories are like teaming up with friends, so it's a good, I've bonded with a lot of my male friends, and doing stuff like this. And there's nothing greater than being with someone who's a friend of yours, a buddy of yours, and winning some money. So, yeah, I've been in some pools, some very high stakes pools, where me and some partners won the pool and won large sums of money. When I was in Los Angeles, I did a lot of work with some very wealthy people in the film industry. And I got to know them, and they were interested in sports gambling. So we would talk about this, and I would travel with some of these guys. And I had the good fortune sometimes of having some patrons who sort of bankrolled me and would give me a certain amount of money to work with. And so there were a couple years back to back where I bet some futures bets. Some Hollywood friends of mine gave me some money to work with, and I bet like a certain team to win the World Series at say 10-1 odds, and I maybe put like on one occasion I put $2,000 on the Houston Astros to win the World Series at 10-1 odds, and they won the World Series that year. And I went to Las Vegas and collected $20,000 in cash. The following year, similar arrangement. I bet the Cleveland Indians to win the American League pennant at about 8-1 odds, and they won the American League pennant. And I went to Vegas and collected about $15,000. So there were 2 years in a row there where I made about 35 grand.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a pretty exciting hobby, actually, when you're collecting double digits. So let me ask you this, because I am not as savvy in the gambling world. So when we say a futures bet, it's simply that. It's self-explanatory. We're betting on something that's going to occur in the future, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
A futures bet is a long-term bet. For example, now the NFL season is going to be starting soon. So the most obvious futures bet would be, okay, who's going to win the Super Bowl? And they offer odds on all 32 teams on winning the Super Bowl. So you could make that bet now, and it would, if your team wins, you would collect at the end of the season.
Okay, so we're starting to get some comments in, and we have some viewers. And Chris, can you bring up Colleen's first comment, and let's see if Rocco can address that comment. What sport pays out the most?
That's a good question. I don't think it's so much about the sport necessarily. I think it's more like the type of bet that you make, if we're talking about individual bets. And that's where odds come into play, like we were just talking about the futures bet. You could bet a team that's more of a favorite, and that's going to pay out less money. Whereas if you bet a real long shot, that bet pays out more. But there could be long shots in football or basketball or baseball. I think the sport that has the most volume bet on it is football. So in totality, if you asked a casino in Las Vegas, what sport do you pay the most out on? I think they'd say football, just because that's where most of the action is.
All right, great. So we have another great question from Will Polston. And so Will's asking, Rocco, my St. Louis Cardinals are plus 6,600 for the 2021 World Series winners. And they are, well, you know the lingo better than I do. So he's asking if he should drop 100 on that.
You should drop. See, now, I don't know your net worth, Will. If you have $200 in your bank account and that's your life savings, do not drop $100 on the St. Louis Cardinals. If you have $1 million and you want to have a little fun and you're not going to sweat it if you lose $100, yeah, throw $100 at St. Louis Cardinals. But in general, I'm going to say no. I wouldn't do that. I just think the National League is so loaded this year, with the Dodgers just picking up Scherzer, and the Padres and the Giants, and the Brewers are pretty good. I think there's a lot of teams. I think there's a lot would have to go right for that bet to win.
So I'll give you a little hint that Will Polson is actually one of our network administrators here. So, and he's also a reporter out in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, his local station. So he could probably afford to lose 100. So that's just a little caveat. So.
Yeah, it's all right. If you can do it for fun, and if you lose it, you're not going to sweat it. Sure.
So Will's responding to your millionaire comment, and he's saying it's fun to pretend one of these days.
Mhm.
So you already have a fan. I'm going to pull up that comment. We have Justin Bozeman who's saying you're the best, Rocco. So you already got some attention here.
That's good. First impressions are important.
So here we go. Here's a question from Kathleen, and I don't know if she's asking if football or horse racing is that your favorite or betting, and just speak about that in broad general terms. And
Yeah. That's kind of an interesting question. I mean, horse racing, I love horse racing, and I don't know a lot about, I'm not great. I don't have deep knowledge about picking horses, but I know people who do, including people in our family. I don't know if you want to single anybody out, but
you can shout it out. I know who you're talking about.
yeah, I mean, Joanne's dad, my Uncle Joe, is one of my gambling mentors, and I think he's pretty savvy with the horses. So if I go to the track with Uncle Joe and I can pick his brain, I'm pretty good at that. Like, that's kind of one of my skills, is sort of picking good sources of information. And if I see someone who I think knows what they're talking about, I can listen to them, and I can maybe make a few bucks that way, just riding their coattails. But I've had some good success at the track, just going with the right people, basically. But the interesting contrast between football and horse racing, it's kind of sad to say, but horse racing is, in the eyes of some people, is fading, and it's a little bit of a relic of the past. And I don't know if there's much of a future in horse racing, or betting horse racing. I hope not, but football is kind of like blowing up, and that's kind of like the future looks bright for betting football. I don't know about horse racing, if it's going to be around that much longer. So it's kind of like football versus horse racing. It's kind of like something that's really active in gambling and has a bright future, and horse racing is more so something that I don't know if that's just like an old school thing, or whether that's going to continue on or not.
I think it's old school, and I think, of course, there's the ethical treatment of animals is probably what's putting the crimp on that.
I agree, and you know what? That bothers me now too. And I'm a guy who loves the track. A day at Saratoga, I love the tradition of it. But it's funny, times change, and your sort of consciousness changes, and I think about that now too. It sort of takes a little bit of the fun out of it to think about the animal welfare aspect.
I think so too. And for someone, I grew up at the track, as you know. I don't want to say that literally, but of course, I spent a lot of time at the track. My father had season tickets, and we went every year. And I never thought about it really until it came out in the last few years. I guess I never even considered it. But you're right. Now it bothers me too. I rarely go to the track, and when I do, I usually typically go with my father once a year. But even my father, who has gone every year, he said, for the past 65 years, didn't go this year. And then I'm saying it may happen, but I think it probably impacts him as well. I think it just wasn't part of our consciousness. So I'm going to put this up, and I'm torn about this remark, but I'll throw it up here. Happy to hear the future is ending for horse racing. Sorry, Uncle Joe. So I won't tell him you said that. Kathleen will keep it a secret. I don't know if he's tuning in. We'll hide that. So we have another comment. We're going to bring this up, and another question. And this is something that I'm interested in hearing your response to as well. Do you think Pete Rose? Yeah, that's a tough one. Do you think
that is a tough one, and that is a great question.
And I like Tommy's comment. First time caller, long time listener.
Yeah.
Love that.
Right. I think it was justified that Pete Rose was kept out of the Hall of Fame initially, and has been for a long time. Like, I don't think he should have got in. And I think a big part of it was his own attitude, his own sort of arrogance, like he never sort of came clean, and he never accepted responsibility, and he never, sort of apologized and acknowledged what he did. Because as much as I do love gambling, I understand, like, there's a major problem for any league to have any of their players or managers betting on the games. I mean, that messes with the integrity of the game, and that's a no-no. So I think it's right that Rose has been left out a long time. I think as so many years have gone by, maybe it's softening a little bit, and I think maybe there could come a day when he could get in. I wouldn't rule that out. I'd accept that decision if baseball wanted to make it at this point, but a lot depends on Pete Rose, maybe and what he has to say about it or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's a tough one.
Let me ask this. I mean, to my knowledge, he still hasn't come clean to this day. He's still in defensive, and so here Will wants to weigh in. I want to bring up first. I'm going to bring his comment, but he did correct me about the $100. Afford to lose 100. I can't even afford to pay attention.
Yeah.
So Will is very, very comedic, and he makes me laugh every day. But so here's his other comment. Let the man in. MLB may be the only sport to keep out their all-time leaders in significant categories like Pete Rose and Barry Bonds.
Yeah. Another aspect is to put him in and have some sort of exhibit or some sort of asterisk there. And when you put his plaque up there, maybe write something out about the history of his background or whatever. It's interesting. I mentioned spending a lot of time in Las Vegas. I crossed paths with Pete Rose more than once in Las Vegas. He lives out there, and he's quite a character, and he's always doing these shows where he's signing autographs for money or whatever. But, he's got this Asian wife who's got these big fake boobs, and she's like a character too, and they're always hanging around in the sports book. So he is unapologetically Vegas gambling. He loves that lifestyle. And yeah.
And I do advocate for people to be who they are. If that's who they are, that's who they are. But the reality is, you should have waited probably until your career was over, especially against your own team. So we got a rivalry going in the comment section, and I don't know if you have the comments on. I'm going to start with this. We had Kimberly Brock with Go Yankees. I'm going to give the fans a tip that Chris is going to side with our next two comments. And
all right,
Christy Wilson is in, and I don't know if you want to tell Christy and a little bit about your history with the Red Sox. I think that's interesting. And then we have Kathleen saying the same. So I think that's interesting. You've grown up as an athlete, and you have a great love for the Red Sox. So tell the listeners about that.
Well, I grew up in the Boston area. And I was even a vendor at Fenway Park for many years, selling hot dogs at the ballpark. So, which is kind of a dream job, if you're a kid in Boston or anywhere else. But Fenway Park's a special place for me. I'm going to be going back there in about a week for the first time in about 5 years. So I'm very excited about that. But, and I'm old enough that I remember the days of losing. Like prior to 2004, that long stretch of time and losing to the Yankees frequently and having a lot of Yankee fans in my family and being teased about it. It's funny in our family, we have like a recessive gene. There's like a few Red Sox who get the Red Sox gene in our family. And then there's predominantly Yankee genes in our family. But it's funny. Everything is, to me, in my mind, everything changed in 2004. Like once we got that win and then won a couple more, it just takes all the pressure off. And frankly, since then, we've kind of had the upper hand on the Yankees. So, that reduces a lot of the tension, with the Yankee fans, and I don't get all wrapped up in it. But prior to 2004, it was intense. It was for real. The 78 playoff game when Bucky Dent hit the home run, I remember that extremely well.
And Kim's a huge Bucky Dent fan. I'm sure she's going to comment on that. Remember that rivalry? I think that it's divided 50-50 in the family. I would say we're probably
that's true.
Yeah, I think it's about even.
I don't know. Yeah, you're right. Because your dad's kind of a Red Sox fan. Yeah.
My dad's a huge Red Sox fan. He's been a Red Sox fan his entire life. And I've told that story before on the program. And Justin, my friend Justin's on. And both of our fathers had the opportunity. Justin's from New England. And both of our fathers attended the World Series. And I think you did too. And we went to a game, and two of our other cousins brought him to Fenway during that. I think he saw game one. So I think that after 65 years, he said, or I forgot, but he's been watching and a fan of the Red Sox since he was 4 or 5. And finally and finally he had the opportunity to go to a game and see them win. So I think that was exciting, and it was a great moment. I don't know if you remember. I think you and I went over. And we hung out and watched that game in a bar. Remember, right outside.
That's
of Fenway.
right.
So that was a big moment for us too.
Yeah, I do remember that now. Yeah, that was a good time.
Yeah, so that's huge. So I knew this was coming. Bucky then started my love of the Yankees, and I want to bring up Christy's story. So the same with she said she grew up with a dad who was a Yankees fan, but ended up becoming a Red Sox fan after reading about their history, especially the curse of the Bambino.
Yeah. It's a fascinating history. It really is. That's one of the things I love about baseball is the history of it. Like it just goes back so far, and it really sort of goes along the pace of so much of American history is tied into sort of the history of baseball. That Ken Burns documentary, called Baseball, is amazing. If you love the sport of baseball and the history of baseball and you want to learn more about it, there's all kinds of stuff about that too.
So Christy, also saying my dad never pushed me to be a Yankees fan. And I think that's true in our household too. My father was a Red Sox fan. My sister was a huge Yankees fan. And, I'm a soft touch, and I had an equal footing. I liked the Red Sox because they were my father's favorite team. But at the same time, I don't know if you remember my story. I went to a game.
Your Lou Piniella story.
Lou Piniella story.
Yeah.
So I became a Yankees fan because they were saying Lou in the stands, and I thought they were booing him. And so I became a huge Lou Piniella fan. And I always find that to be comedic to this day. I think it was, maybe 10 years later, I found out that they were actually saying Lou, and but by then I was already his, the president of his fan club. Probably I was already sending out the flyers. It was too late. Once I'm in, I'm in.
Well, lucky for you, Lou Piniella was a pretty cool player.
Yeah, he was.
If it was some scrub, that would have been more difficult, I think. But and even as a Yankee hater, like I look back on those guys now with some fondness, like Lou Piniella. He was a classic. Some of them I legitimately did. Reggie Jackson was sort of easy to hate, and they had some brawls, back in the day where they would actually they would go at it physically. And Greg Nettles one time stepped on Bill Lee's shoulder and separated his shoulder, so I never liked Greg Nettles. But yeah, and then as time's gone by, like Jeter, you got to respect that guy, and probably Mariano Rivera is like a super classy guy, so.
Yeah,
the Yankees Red Sox thing is a lot different for me now. It's not as intense as it used to be, but clearly the Red Sox are the choice. And Christy, that's very admirable of you, that choice you made there.
So we could take this show in an entirely different direction with this comment, but I got to bring it up because I agree. I concur. Oh, yeah. Oh, not that one. Bernie, not that wasn't where I was going. I hit the wrong one, but Bernie Williams is still Kim's favorite. But
excellent classical guitar player as well. Bernie Williams.
So this is Kathleen's Jeter was hot, just saying. I will agree with that. And we're not going to talk about, hot baseball players tonight. Kristen, Rocco didn't sign up for that, but
no. I mean, yeah, I don't really see it with Jeter, but a lot of women seem to, so I guess there's something there.
So I'm going to bring this up, and let's bring it up. So Justin is asking, what's your take on Stephen Smith saying Ohtani needs to speak English to improve the game? And
disagree.
Yeah.
Ohtani's amazing. I love Ohtani. Probably my favorite, I've often said, probably my favorite non-Red Sox player of all time is Ichiro Suzuki, because always I love the Japanese aspect of him, like as a guy, like he was just such a humble guy. There wasn't any sort of bragging or anything. Like he just went out there and played the game, and he was great, and he let his game speak. And I love the international flavor of the game. I love having all different nationalities in the game and the best players from around the world. And Ohtani's an amazing player, and from what I understand, an amazing guy. So, no, that's Stephen Smith being a loudmouth, and just looking for something bombastic to say himself. I'll take Ohtani's side of that debate.
And Christy's going to agree with you there. Stephen Smith it's full of it. I see too, and Justin and I have spoken about this many times. Justin is a huge Red Sox fan, and he's always enamored, and he has a great interest in men versus women. And I don't know if you know this story. And Justin, I forget the woman's name, but a great softball player, one of the probably the U.S.'s one of their best softball players struck Ted Williams out once. Did you ever hear that story? Several times, actually. And he was very frustrated by it. And he always wants us to get that woman on the show. She's still alive. She's about 80 now. She's actually a very impressive woman. And Justin, throw in the comments what her name is again. We read a little bit. He knows a lot about her, and I've read about her, but I don't think Ted Williams is overrated. I think that's hard to overrate Ted Williams. He was very impressive. And he's saying Joan Joyce. Her name was Joan Joyce. So I'm
going to look that up. Yeah, I never heard that story before.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Yeah, that is impressive. So was softball we're saying? It was like underhanded softball pitching.
She's from Waterbury. She's actually a coach with she's still a coach, I believe, right? I'm new to the commenting myself. She's from Waterbury and coaches the Florida Atlantic. So she was a softball player, but she was I don't know if it was slow pitch. Justin, was it slow pitch or fast pitch? I tend to think it was fast pitch. I don't think she was a slow pitch.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because the mound is a lot closer, I think, in softball, right? So it's just a different kind of hitting, I think. Ted Williams is, not really used to hitting with the mound that close, and I don't know the story. I mean, but that's an interesting story. I'm going to look that up for sure, and that's definitely cool. But I don't think Ted Williams is overrated.
And definitely her story in itself is pretty impressive. I'm actually going to try to get her on the show. Justin has asked me to reach out to her, and I'm going to do that. So
that'd be awesome.
And he's saying it's fast pitch. So we don't want to get, this is a great sports commentary. Oh, she's 80 years old and still coaching. That's pretty impressive.
That's very impressive.
But let's talk a little bit more about the handicapping. Let's talk about your thoughts and plans for the new show. What do you have in mind for it? When I believe it's going to premiere. We said potentially. I don't know. Did you make a determination? The first.
I think we could be looking at the last Friday in August,
all right,
which would be 2 weeks before the season starts. So I was thinking maybe we'd do the first week we'd do maybe an AFC preview. And then the second week we do an NFC preview, and then we'd start the season. And at that point, we'd be talking about like the weekly slate of games each week, basically. But I thought it'd be fun to do like a sort of general preview, AFC, NFC, starting last week of August.
All right, that's great. And you're going to have a co-host, Margie, and that's going to be exciting. That's going to bring some diversity, a little bit more diversity especially to our sports programming. I do a little bit of sports tinkering with my show with Bodine Sanders, but that's really in regard to the societal aspects of sports. I'm not talking stats or ERAs or batting averages, any of that. So it'll be interesting to have a woman. Actually, we have Vic. Vic just came back to the network as well. She's a huge baseball fan, and she's very savvy in the sports world. So I want to give Vic her due, and she's a co-host of Sports Minute. So Margie will be joining some great company on the network in regard to women in sports. So Kathleen's asking a question. She's asking me a question, actually. I'm going to defer to Chris on this. American versus national, Joe, FYI. So you're correcting me. I understand the baseball leagues, correct? I am not that far out of the loop, but thank you for the clarification. So who do you think, just going in, do you have any futures expectations for the football NFL going into before we even go into the season?
Well, I'm still researching, I don't want to lock in anything, yet, but I mean, there's some interesting teams that I'm sort of intrigued by. I mean, like this time of year, basically I'm trying to look at, teams that may be under the radar this season that might be better than people realize, or might take a jump up this year or drop down, that might not be as good as people think or better than people think. So this way we can find value and we can be a little ahead of the curve on certain teams. Everybody knows who like the best teams are. Everybody knows Tampa Bay and Kansas City, and those teams are very good. But the interesting thing from like more of a handicap perspective is to look for some, like I said, under the radar teams, one team that I was reading about a little bit recently that I think is very interesting is the Jacksonville Jaguars. And they were the worst team in the NFL last year. And they had the first pick in the draft, and they drafted this quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, who is probably the best quarterback prospect to come in the league since Andrew Luck.
Really?
And to use an example, Andrew Luck, the year before Andrew Luck came in, the Colts were 2-14. They were the worst team in the league. That's why they got the first pick. In his rookie year, they were 11-5, and they made the playoffs.
Wow.
I'm not saying Jacksonville is going to do that, but they're in a good situation because that division is, I don't think is a little weak. The Colts have already had a couple of huge injuries. Houston's not going to be good, I don't think. And Tennessee is probably the favorite, but I'm not too, scared of, they're not one of the better teams in the league. I think Jacksonville is an interesting sleeper for me. On a lot of levels, but I don't have to go into too much detail, but that would be one example.
All right. So we got a comment. Kim's putting out a futures prediction. She's going with the Colts for 2022.
Well, the Colts, their quarterback is hurt, and then they just lost an offensive lineman. They're both out 5 to 12 weeks, they said, which is a wide range, So, they need to get their quarterback healthy and get a good, get some good quarterback play, because right now they don't really have a good backup. So they need to work that out. But they're a decent team if they can figure out their quarterback situation.
So let me ask you this, and I think that this is an interesting perspective. So we have Tom Brady, who obviously was on the Patriots for 10, 15 years. I don't even know the exact
closer
number.
to 20.
Yeah, closer to 20. So, and now he's down at Tampa. But where do your loyalties lie? Do your loyalties lie with the team, the Patriots, or do they lie with Tom Brady? And I think that's an interesting perspective.
That's a great question. And I had some discussion about this, especially when he first left last year. I immediately started saying to my friends, all right, like before the season, like, let's say it's Tampa Bay against the Patriots in the Super Bowl. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure I wouldn't be rooting for Tom Brady against the Patriots. I'm not much of a Tom Brady fan. It's funny. I heard an interview recently with Matt Damon, famous Boston sports fan, Matt Damon, and he said pretty much the same thing. There's this big debate, like Belichick versus Brady, who's more responsible for their success. Obviously, it's both. Obviously, Belichick's an incredible coach, but I'm a Brady guy, and I was into it last year. And, I bet Tampa Bay in that game, and I would have if I wasn't a Brady fan. But yeah, now I think now that a year's gone by and like it's sunk in a little bit, I do think maybe I'm gravitating back towards my Patriots fandom. And I do think the Patriots could be interesting this year. They could be back on the map this year, possibly. So, but the good news is that he's in the other conference. So although they do play this year, there's room for both. But when they play each other this year, I will be conflicted for sure.
Now, do you know where they're playing? Are they in New England or are they going to be in Tampa?
I think it's in New England.
So that would be interesting. That's a game that I'd like to go to.
That's going to be a hot ticket.
Yeah, it's going to be a hot ticket. Well, I am a sports personality now, so maybe I can get in on a press pass. I'll have to work on that, right?
Start working the angles right now.
Right. You and I could be there on the press pass now. We will be credentialed sports program anchors. So Kathleen is saying that Tom was actually there from 2000 to 2019. So yeah, 19 years, 19 seasons. That's impressive just in general. Nevertheless, on one team to be in the NFL for 19 years. So, and I always talk about this. I mean, Tom Brady is such a specimen of health. His whole entire lifestyle is really, in my opinion, what really propelled him to success. I mean, he certainly has talent, but he monitors everything he eats and drinks, and I think that's just something to emulate. It's not for everybody, of course, but it's really impressive in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to be careful with it because, like, Tom Brady's a unicorn. You know what I mean? Like, 99% of human beings, you know, you're not going to be Tom Brady athletically, but even with that lifestyle, I mean, he's even on the extreme. You know,
Yes.
I think for most people, maybe it wouldn't be healthy to be as extreme as Tom Brady is, but obviously it works for Tom Brady, you know.
Certainly does. So now I forgot what my next question was going to be. I got derailed, and Kathleen was over there in the sidelines. So I think so I was going to say, did you hear the controversy about Tom this week? You know, he gave some backlash to his players. He was telling them, and I think that is very common. Bodine and I have spoken about that. And how important the supporting players are to a football team. And we have one of the Barber brothers on. Jason's tuning into the program, and I appreciate it. He's a very savvy. I'd actually love to see you and Jason talking sports because you're very you have great similarities, and he's very intelligent and savvy in the sports realm as well. So tell me what you think about the supporting players and how important are they to the team? We spoke about Tom Brady, but what about everybody else? Are they as important as the coach and the quarterback?
Absolutely. But that's one of the things that makes Tom Brady great is that he lifts up the people around him. He makes them better. Like, he's not just a great football player, he's a leader, you know, like, and that Tampa Bay franchise, they had good players. They had talent. They just were a losing organization. They had a losing mentality, and they couldn't shake it for many years. And Tom Brady came in and he changed it overnight. Like, just like, there's a winner in the house now, and I'm not going to tolerate any bullshit. And I think one of the things is when you have a player like that, like a Michael Jordan or a Larry Bird or a Tom Brady, who's the best player on the team, and they are busting their ass. They're the hardest worker on the team. Everyone else, like, they'll feel ashamed if they're not putting the effort in themselves. Like, no, everyone's like, oh my God, Tom Brady is working this hard. I'm not going to like slack off here, you know, and everyone elevates. So I think, yes, the rest of the team is important, but Tom Brady makes the rest of the team better.
I think that's important, not only in sports, but in every area of life. When you can't be a leader if you don't have a following. And I always speak about that in regard to leadership. And so few people in position, I will say, very few people in positions of power are really true, emulate the ideals and characteristics of leadership, in my opinion. There are certainly some standouts. So I love that you said that. So let's get down to the basics of handicapping. I think that many of my viewers are not, they're not as savvy in the sports realm as some of the other programs on the network. Where do you start? Well, let's get right down to the basics. What is the spread? Explain what the spread is to people who may not know.
Well, I was going to say maybe I should okay. I was going to talk more about like my general philosophy, but we can get to that next. Well, basically the point spread is kind of like if two teams are playing each other and one team is obviously better than the other team. I mean, everybody knows that, team A is much better than team B. What's a way that we could gamble or make a bet on that game that would be fair and would make it interesting on both sides? Because obviously if you have Tampa Bay playing against the worst team in the league, everybody's just going to bet on Tampa Bay, and that's no fun. And it's, no one's going to take that action. So what you do is you create a point spread, which means that Tampa Bay has to win by X amount of points. And the greater the disparity between the two teams in the public perception, the greater the point spread is. And so if they make it big enough, So Tampa Bay has to win by 10 points or 14 points. Eventually they'll get to a point where some people will start to say, oh, I'll bet on this other team. And any casino that's setting the line like that, their goal is to get equal bets on both sides. So they're trying to find that point spread that's going to entice 50% of people to bet either way.
And are those all established in Vegas?
Generally, yeah. Yeah, that's like the source of it. And it goes out from there. There are like syndicates or whatever. There are actually like consultants who develop point spreads, and it goes out in a variety of different ways. But yeah, Vegas is kind of the hub for that. Yeah.
So
and what they do is they charge. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I know Jason's only on for a limited time, but Jason is actually going to Vegas tomorrow for the very first time. What would you recommend that if he wanted to place a futures bet, what would you recommend, that it's on football or the World Series, or what would be something that he might delve into and give it a shot out there?
Hey, yeah. Well, the Olympics are going on right now. You know, you might, did you say he's going tomorrow?
He's going tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some Olympic action now. The Olympic basketball tournament is like the semifinals are tonight. So he might be there for the gold medal game of the Olympic basketball. You could look at that, and it'll most likely be the USA. Maybe in a rematch against France, which could be interesting. There's also the baseball tournament is going on, and Major League Baseball is happening right now. But yeah, for futures bets, in the NFL, I think
he's a huge Green Bay Packer fan. That's his.
Well, that wouldn't be a terrible bet. In fact, I checked this. Let me check the odds. I think I got Green Bay as about 12-1. So if you put $100 on Green Bay and they win the Super Bowl, that'll pay you back 1,200. And I think that's not a bad bet. I think Green Bay's got a shot.
All right. So if he's not on, I'll have to catch him up later. He'll be on another program later tonight. So yeah, that's interesting. So let's go into your philosophy. I didn't want to derail you from that. So because I think that's certainly an important perspective of the whole year.
Yeah. And I think this is something people can relate to, like I think in other areas besides just sports and sports betting. Like I think the interesting thing is, like, as we all know, we're living in the information age now. So we have all these sources of information available to us. We have all these people online and on TV talking about sports and sports gambling. And I think one of the skills that's useful today in any area of life is being able to sort through all this information to decide what's a good source, what's a bad source, like what's the right piece of information to look at that's going to like put me on the right path, and what's a misleading source of information. And that's kind of like how I see myself, like as a person who is good at identifying the right sources of information and processing all the information that's out there, and sort of seeing through the hype and the misinformation that a lot of the media puts out, and trying to find some deeper sort of truth that we can hang our hat on. The other way I would look at it is like a difference between perception and reality. Like, the point spread is based on the public perception of certain teams. And at times that perception may be accurate, and at times maybe a certain team might be overrated or underrated. And when there's a gap between the perception and the reality, that's where you can make money gambling. It's like exploiting that gap. So like that's sort of a general idea. And like I said, I think that's a good way of looking at all areas of life these days when you're trying to figure out what's true and what's not.
So we have a question from Tim Fielder. I'm going to bring that up. And he's saying he's in a state that doesn't allow sports betting. What's your thoughts on FanDuel and DraftKings? I'm not sure what that is.
Well, FanDuel and DraftKings are, they're groups that allow gambling on fantasy football and on sports. But I think the way it works is if you're in a sport that doesn't allow sports betting, you're not allowed to use those apps, I don't think. I might be wrong about that, but yeah, it's a weird situation, like in all various aspects of our life in this country where we're federalism, like we just have vastly different rules in different states, and gambling is one of them. So I think a lot of states are going to be catching up and legalizing gambling quickly when they realize the kind of revenue they're missing out on. But yeah, it's a bummer if you're in a state that doesn't allow it.
I think that drives so much of societal change. I think that's really, and this is entirely off topic, but I agree. I think that gambling is going to catch up. And I think that's really was the push behind much of the legalization of marijuana too. It's really about a numbers game. Government is business, and all of the objections that they had been speaking about for years fell to the wayside when we were going through an economic deficit, right? And I think that's going to be true. I agree about gambling. Post COVID, we're going to be in, some states are certainly going to be in a socioeconomic deficit and deficiencies. And I think you might be in luck, Tim Fielder. I hate to see it based on that, but it's probably coming up.
Yeah.
So, and I forget what team Tim Fielder likes. He's also one of the admins here at Coast to Coast, a huge sports fan, very knowledgeable, and he also serves our country. So I'm a big fan of his. He's a fan of Tim. So Tim is saying Tim doesn't want it to be legalized. He says he's going to go broke. So, well, you're not going to go broke because now we have Rocco on the network, and he's gonna help us prevent that. Oh, so here's my question: as someone who's watched, I've watched my father handicap throughout my entire life, and whereas I would go to the track, and if I saw a purple jersey or a pink hat, that might be how I make bets and pick. But here's the reality. I mean, this takes research and time. How much time does it take out of your day to become as knowledgeable about football handicapping as you are? It's not as simple as people believe.
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's one of the reasons where I think hopefully maybe that our show could be of use, because people don't have the time and they need some shortcuts, and hopefully we can help provide that. My thing is, like, every year I put a lot of time in before the season, getting like a foundation of knowledge. I do a lot of reading. Probably too much, you know what I mean? Like, because I probably should be spending more time on other things, but I enjoy it. It's a passion. I'm self-employed, so I can manage my own time and I can manage my own hours. So I do. Yeah. And then I love it during the season. I watch the games, but I also know the shortcuts myself. Like I think as I said, I think I've identified some good sources and like sources that I trust, and I try and limit it during the year, like put a cap on, all right, I'm going to only put X amount of time into it, but I'm going to maximize that time by making sure that I'm looking at the best possible sources. And I actually believe sometimes I've learned less is more. Like, you can have information overload. You can be just taking in all this information, and at the end of the day, you can't make sense of it. So, the answer is I put in more time than like probably the average person would or has, but it's not all I do 24/7. Like, I also work and make a living, and I find a way to fit it into my other activities in life.
But that's certainly a benefit to our viewers because you're doing all the legwork in advance.
Let me put the time in so you don't have to. Yeah.
I think that's beneficial. And so Tim has a great question. When do you bet on underdogs? I mean, when do you take that risk?
Well, see, the interesting thing is, there's two ways to bet on underdogs. We didn't even talk about the money line, which is another way of betting. We talked about the point spread, which means you're getting X amount of points if you take the underdog. There's also the money line where you're getting no points and you're just betting on this underdog to win the game outright, and you're being paid off more money. You're being your $100 might pay you back $200 or $300, depending on how big of an underdog your team was. So it's really a case-by-case basis. I do like to bet on underdogs. Like, one thing we know is that the public prefers to bet on favorites. So as a general rule, you're probably going to be getting if you're picking blindly, I would always pick an underdog because you're probably going to get value on an underdog because the public likes to bet the favorite, and the people who make the lines know that. So they sort of shade the line a little bit to make sure they're not getting burned on the favorites all the time. So I'm looking to bet the underdog first more often than not. I mean, I don't do it blindly, but it's a case by case basis. But I think underdogs. I prefer to bet underdogs than favorites.
That's interesting. And my Lou Piniella story. I'm all about that. But
Right.
so here I am, somebody who has never bet on, and I'm saying never in the office pool, I'll put $10 on the Super Bowl square or something like that. But let's say I'm a big fan of your program. You've told me to go out and bet on I'll go with the team I used to like when I was younger, the San Francisco 49ers. And that was based on the big catch, but that was who I liked when I was young. But how would I even go about making a bet? I'm not even sure if I don't believe is sports gambling even. I don't even know if it's legal in New York State. I forgot.
Absolutely, it is.
All right.
Yeah, it all depends on what state you're in. It's totally different from state to state. New York, they're right about 30 minutes from where you're located. There's the Rivers Casino in Schenectady, and they have a sports book there, and you can walk in and make a bet there.
So that's how you do it.
One of the things that a lot of states, like I lived in Chicago recently for a couple of years, and in Illinois, you can just bet on your phone. You don't even have to leave your house. I think New York is working towards that, and very soon, hopefully, we'll have that. So you'll be able to just make a bet on your phone without even getting off your couch, which could be good or bad depending on your perspective. Right now, it's a half-hour drive. I was talking to some people the other day. Like, I've had a couple times recently where I had a bet I wanted to make, and it was like, half-hour drive, and I kind of blew it off because I was lazy. And then, if the bet wins, you're like, I should have gone. But
yeah, I doubt I'll be driving anywhere to make a bet. Now I have you, though. I can, we'll have Tim Fielder. Tim Fielder is going to, he's going to cross state lines and take care of it for us with those two apps that he spoke about. So Kathleen's very similar to myself. She's upset she lost $50 in Atlantic City 20 years ago.
Yeah. Some people, it's very much like a temperament thing, like some people have that risk tolerance and they enjoy it. And then some people, the idea of gambling $1, freaks them out. And I get it, that's a personal thing. I actually consider myself to be like a pretty conservative gambler. You know what I mean? Like I have friends who are, like really have high risk tolerance and they'll bet crazy, amounts on games. I'm pretty low key. I'm pretty conservative. And one thing we'll talk about, there's a whole other aspect to gambling besides picking the games, which is money management, it's called. And that's like, how you manage your money, like what system you have for what's your bankroll, how much do you bet on each wager, what percentage of your bankroll, and there's all kinds of theories about that. And that's as much a part about making money betting on football as anything else is money management, just as much as picking the winners.
I think that's a great aspect I didn't even know about. You've already taught me several things tonight, so I appreciate it. And I know Chris, our producer behind the scenes, is taking notes as well. He wanted to learn a little bit more about it. But I thought it was interesting when you were speaking about how some people, are huge love to wager, others don't. And I think we were talking about the 50-50 Yankee Red Sox divide in our family. I think that's true for the gambling gene too. I think it's 50-50. 50% of us are really advocate for gambling and are participate in it, and then the other 50 of us are much more conservative. So that's an interesting perspective.
But I will say, from what I can see, like the people who are into it in our family, they're pretty responsible about it. You know what I mean? Like they treat it responsibly, and it's a fun hobby, and it's a fun way to make a few extra bucks. But I don't think we've had anybody in our family lose the mortgage on betting or anything. Now
that I know how to do it, it could be me.
Yeah. But like, just to give an example, as I said, like a lot of my fun gambling stories have to do with friends of mine, not me. But like, I'm sure a lot of your viewers out there, if they're sports fans, might remember the Patriots Seattle Seahawks Super Bowl, when Seattle had the ball on like the 1 yard line and was about to win the game, and all they had to do was run the ball, and they ran a passing play, and the Patriots intercepted the ball and won the game. I was in Las Vegas for that game, and there was almost a riot in the sports book. Like, it was pandemonium. But I had a friend who had $100,000 on the Seattle Seahawks in that game. And when he was going to win $100,000, and when that interception was thrown, it cost him $100,000. Like, that's some heavy risk tolerance. You know what I mean? That's living on the edge. And that anyone who knows that game and knows how that game ended can imagine what it would be like to have $100,000 riding on it.
Was he with you in Vegas when it happened? Were you there?
No.
I would like
No.
to see
In
that
fact, he
reaction.
tells a great story about it, about being at a party with a bunch of people who were not into gambling. And I think he was supposed to be quitting. Like, he had quit gambling. And he had quit. And this was his final bet. He said, I'm going to make one more bet. It's the Super Bowl. It's the last game of the season, and then I'm done. And he was at a party with a bunch of people who did not know that he had $100,000 on this game. So he had to sort of like process that emotionally and interact with other people at the party who were just talking about, you know, small talk or whatever after he just lost $100,000. So I was not with them, although I wish I was. It would have been fascinating to watch.
Now, is that a friend that I know? Is it who I'm thinking of?
Yeah, we won't mention any names, but
No, we won't.
yes,
I'll
you
keep
do
it
know his friend. Yeah.
So that,
That's another interesting like aspect of gambling. He's one of my best friends, and our friendship began over gambling. And there's another story that goes back to when I was in college that I didn't even get into tonight. But our friendship formed through gambling, and this was about 30 years ago. And we've become friends on many other different levels, but we connected on gambling. We've had many gambling adventures, and he's a guy who's had some issues with it, and he's now quit gambling, which is great. And I support him on it. So, but now it's an interesting aspect in our friendship, like, you know, navigating that. And a lot of friendships can't survive that. Like, a lot of guys, when they quit, they just want to like distance themselves from all the friends they once gambled with. But I think luckily our friendship is pretty solid, and like we work on a lot of different levels, and we're able to still be good friends. But it's another interesting side of gambling is sort of the friendship aspect of it too.
well, that's an interesting perspective, and I don't know if he shares his story, but it'd be interesting, you know, once your show starts, maybe I could get him on as a guest on this show, and he could tell that other side of gambling. They could coincide. I could do a special, whatever, on Wednesday, on a Friday, following or after your show, because we do want to advocate. Of course, we do recognize that gambling can be a problem for some people, and you know, we don't want to exacerbate that
And we could talk about that in our show as well, like gambling issues and gambling addiction and problems. And if anybody out there feels like they have a problem with gambling, or someone they know has a problem with gambling, we can talk about that and maybe figure out how to deal with that and who to call and, you know, what steps you can take.
Yeah, we have a great hotline in New York, and we actually have another show dedicated to addiction as well. But that's substance abuse. But that's we certainly have a perspective of that on Coast to Coast that we're always mindful of as well. So we have 2 minutes left. I think that we talked about a lot. I'm excited for the new show. This is a great sneak preview, and I appreciate you coming on. What do you want to say? How do you want to close it out? I'm going to throw it to you.
You know, let's get excited for football season, you know, and we're going to be here on the last Friday in August, I believe, previewing the AFC. And I think it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. Let's get excited.
Let's get excited. And in the meantime, we're going to be in suspense. We're waiting for the name of the show, the big reveal. We have that to look forward to. So
I have some more ideas, and we can talk about that this week.
All right, perfect. So that'll be exciting for the fans to come in and hear the show and the motto or whatever the tagline is going to be, if we're going to have one. So we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank my guest Chris, and thank all the viewers. Thank you, Kathleen and Tim and Jason and Kim and Colleen and Christy. I think we had a lot of interaction tonight, and that always makes the show better. Jason. We certainly appreciate it. Will, my friend Will, and it's a great. We're going to share this around too. We're going to share this after the fact. We always share it live and after the fact, so we may get more comments. And you can certainly, if anybody wants to connect with Rocco, you can send me a personal message, a DM, and I'll make sure that he gets it. So I always end any show the same way. We couldn't do anything without our man behind the scenes, our producer Chris. So Chris, thanks so much you're the best in the biz as far as I'm concerned. concerned. And I'll actually see you later tonight for segment 2. I'm on 3 shows tonight. So if anybody's around, I have the Bo and Joe show coming up where we're going to talk about the Olympics and break down all of the things that are happening over there in Tokyo. And that's interesting. We're going to talk about the ESPN controversy, which we haven't had time to get into, Maria and Maria Taylor and what happened over there at ESPN. And then we have Roundtable tonight. And if you are interested in learning more about any of the coast to coast personalities, we're going to have a show tonight and you can ask us anything, almost anything. You can ask the guys anything. I'm a little bit more censored, but anyway, you can play us out, Chris. Thanks very much. And I'll see you later, Justin.